Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Channel. Tonight, we are turning our attention to something familiar, yet endlessly alluring. Most people know chocolate as simply a sweet treat, but are unaware of the remarkable journey behind it. This is a story that begins in tropical forests and ends in one of the most recognizable flavors on Earth. Chocolate is shaped by biology, chemistry, weather, and time. It carries the influence of microbes, the decisions of farmers, and the quiet precision of craft. There is far more happening in chocolate than sweetness alone. Aroma, texture, and its ability to melt are guided by invisible structures and slow transformations. Small changes can alter everything, from how it breaks to how long its flavor lingers. Across centuries, chocolate was integral to medicine, currency, ritual, comfort, and celebration. Even now, it continues to evolve as science and tradition meet in unexpected ways. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, there's nothing you need to do but relax. Allow your body to soften. Allow your breathing to slow. And let your mind settle into curiosity as we explore this fascinating story together. Let's begin. Chocolate begins as a tropical fruit, not as a sweet treat. If you ever held a cacao pod, you would not mistake it for candy. It grows like a small, ridged melon on a tree, with a thick shell that protects what matters inside. When the pod is opened, you find glossy seeds packed in pale, tangy pulp that tastes more like lychee than dessert. That surprise is the point. The chocolate part is not waiting fully formed. It has to be coaxed out through a chain of human choices, from harvest timing to careful drying. In its raw state, the seed is a living thing, designed to sprout. The flavors we crave are a transformation, built from plant chemistry and patient craft. Every bar begins as a fruit you could carry in your hands. Chocolate melts near body temperature, which is why it feels magical. The sensation is not just sweetness, it is timing. A firm piece becomes fluid right as it warms on your tongue, and that quick change makes flavor bloom. When the fat melts, it releases aroma molecules that were trapped while the chocolate was solid. That is why smell seems to rise as the texture softens. It also changes how you chew. Instead of crunching for long, you can let it dissolve, and the experience becomes slower and more intimate. This melting behavior is rare among foods we treat as candy. Many sweets stay hard, or they become sticky. Chocolate seems to disappear into warmth, and your mouth becomes part of the process. Even the sound can shift, from a clean bite to a quiet fade. The magic is physics and chemistry working at the scale of a single degree, turned into a feeling of comfort. Your brain links chocolate's aroma and fat with comfort surprisingly fast. Flavor is not only on the tongue, it is also in memory, and chocolate is built to leave a strong trace there. When warm fat carries aroma up into the nose, the brain treats that smell as part of the taste, and it stores the whole package as one experience. If chocolate shows up during rest, celebration, or relief after a hard day, those moments can become tied to the scent itself. Later, a whiff can bring back the feeling before a bite even happens. That is not weakness. It is a normal feature of how learning works in the brain. The pairing is especially strong when texture is smooth and melting, because the mouth reads that as safe and easy. Over time, chocolate can become a shortcut to a familiar emotional state, built from repeated small moments that your nervous system quietly catalogs. Chocolate flavor can shift by harvest season, like wine grapes do. For cacao trees, each season writes a slightly different draft of flavor. A wetter period can change how sugars develop in the pulp. A drier stretch can concentrate certain compounds in the seed. Temperature swings can influence flowering and pod development, which affects how uniform a harvest becomes. Then the post-harvest work responds to those conditions. Drying might take longer. Fermentation might heat faster or slower. The result is that chocolate made from one harvest can taste brighter, while the next harvest tastes deeper, even when the farm and maker stay the same. This is why serious chocolate makers track lots and seasons, and why some even print harvest information on packaging. It also changes how you should taste. Instead of expecting sameness, you can listen for variation. Seasonal change is not a flaw. It is a sign that chocolate is still connected to a living crop, and living crops never repeat themselves perfectly. Even the same farm can taste different after a rainy month. Rain does not only water trees, it reshapes the entire chain from pod to bean. Extra moisture can slow drying, which changes how long beans sit with their own acids and sugars. It can also make fermentation harder to manage, because cooler, wetter air pulls heat away from the pile. Farmers might need to extend fermentation, adjust turning, or protect beans more carefully during drying to prevent unwanted off-notes. Even the pulp can behave differently, since water content affects how quickly microbes move through sugars. After a rainy month, a farm's chocolate might taste brighter and more tangy, or it might taste softer and less intense, depending on how those conditions were handled. The fascinating part is that this variation can happen without any change in genetics or location. The same trees can speak in a different voice, simply because the sky delivered a different rhythm. When you eat chocolate, you are not only tasting a place, you are tasting a particular month in that place. Many cacao farms rely on hand harvesting because pods ripen unevenly. A cacao tree does not behave like a machine that ripens everything at once. Pods on the same tree can be at different stages, and color change can vary by variety and by sunlight exposure. That unevenness makes hand harvesting practical and often necessary. Workers choose pods that look ready, then leave the rest to mature. This selective approach protects flavor, because ripeness affects the pulp that will drive fermentation later. It also protects the tree, because harvesting requires precise cuts near sensitive areas where flowers emerge. Mechanized stripping would damage future production. Hand harvesting is slow, and it is one reason cacao farming is labor-intensive. It is also intimate. The harvester becomes the quality control system, reading each pod like a signal. The rhythm of harvest becomes a series of careful choices rather than a single event. When you unwrap chocolate, you are holding the result of countless individual decisions, made one pod at a time. The smell of chocolate can trigger craving before a bite happens. Experiencing a craving for chocolate often begins in the air. The moment chocolate aroma reaches your nose, your brain starts predicting what might come next. It remembers past rewards, and it prepares your body to receive them. Saliva can increase. Attention can narrow. You might even feel a small lift in mood before any sweetness touches your tongue. This is not a lack of willpower. It is your nervous system doing its job, because smells are powerful signals. They arrive quickly, and they connect strongly to memory and emotion. Chocolate aroma is especially effective because it often appears in moments of comfort, celebration, or relief. Over time, those contexts become part of the scent itself. That is why passing a bakery can feel like a magnet, even if you were not hungry a minute earlier. The smell does not need permission. It walks straight into the brain's prediction system and starts writing the next scene. Chocolate's signature richness comes from cocoa butter, not from sugar. Sugar can make chocolate sweet, but it cannot make it feel luxurious. That pleasure comes from fat, and cocoa butter is a very specific kind of fat. It coats your tongue in a thin, smooth layer that carries aroma upward into your nose, which is where much of flavor truly lands. It also softens edges. Bitterness can feel sharper when a food is dry. Add cocoa butter, and those same flavors feel rounder and deeper. This is why two bars with similar sweetness can feel completely different. One can seem chalky or thin. Another can feel full and lingering. Cocoa butter also acts like a conductor for texture. It helps the particles in chocolate slide past each other instead of scraping. When people describe chocolate as creamy even when there is no dairy, they are often describing cocoa butter doing its quiet work. Cocoa butter is solid at room temperature, but melts on your tongue. This is one of the reasons chocolate feels like it has perfect timing. In your hand, it can stay firm enough to break cleanly. In your mouth, it turns fluid quickly, and that shift changes how flavor arrives. When cocoa butter melts, it releases aroma compounds that were trapped in a solid matrix, and those aromas rise into the back of the nose as you breathe. Texture transforms too. Instead of resisting your teeth, the chocolate begins to glide, and the experience becomes more like a slow dissolve than a chew. That melt can also make sweetness feel stronger, because dissolved sugars spread across the tongue more evenly. A bar that melts poorly can taste dull, even when the ingredients are good. Cocoa butter's melt pattern is a built-in design feature of the cacao seed, and it just happens to match the warmth of the human mouth with uncanny precision. Chocolate bloom is fat crystals rising, not mold or spoilage. A bloomed bar can look alarming. You might see pale streaks or a cloudy film, and it can resemble something that should be thrown away. In most cases, it is not a safety issue. It is a structure issue. Over time, cocoa butter can migrate and then re-solidify on the surface in a different crystal arrangement. That new surface scatters light, which makes the chocolate look grey or dusty. The texture can change too. The snap may feel weaker, and the melt can seem less graceful. Bloom often happens when chocolate experiences repeated temperature swings, like moving from a warm room to a cool one and back again. It can also happen if the chocolate was not set in a stable crystal structure to begin with. The key point is reassuring. Bloom is usually chocolate aging out loud, not chocolate going bad. Sugar bloom happens when moisture dissolves sugar, then dries rough. This kind of bloom feels different. Instead of a silky film, the surface can feel gritty or sandy, and it often appears after condensation. Picture a cold bar taken from the refrigerator into warm air. Water can collect on the surface in a thin layer. That moisture dissolves some of the sugar, and when the water evaporates, the sugar is left behind in tiny crystals. Those crystals scatter light and create a pale haze, but the texture clue is the giveaway. It feels rough, not waxy. The flavor can seem oddly sharper too, because sugar crystals hit the tongue in concentrated spots. Sugar bloom does not mean the chocolate is moldy. It means the chocolate got wet and then dried. The fix is not a new ingredient. The fix is better storage, with stable temperature and low humidity, so water never gets the chance to rewrite the surface. Chocolate carries tiny amounts of caffeine, usually much less than coffee. People sometimes feel a small lift after chocolate and assume it must be packed with caffeine. In reality, chocolate usually contains only modest amounts, and the amount depends on how much cocoa is in the recipe. Darker chocolate tends to have more caffeine than milk chocolate because caffeine lives in the cocoa solids. Even then, the typical effect is gentle compared with a cup of coffee. That can make chocolate feel like a softer companion to late afternoons, rather than a sharp jolt. It can also be misleading, because chocolate's pleasure can feel energizing even when caffeine is minimal. Taste, aroma, and expectation can all create a sense of perkiness that is not purely chemical. The practical takeaway is simple. If caffeine is a concern, the cocoa percentage matters more than the bar's size alone. Chocolate can contain caffeine, but it rarely behaves like coffee. Theobromine is chocolate's main stimulant, gentler but longer lasting. Chocolate's most distinctive stimulant is not caffeine. It is theobromine, a compound that belongs to the same chemical family but tends to feel smoother in the body. People often describe it as a steady lift rather than a quick spike. That matters for how chocolate feels, because the experience can unfold slowly. You taste, you melt, you breathe, and then the subtle stimulation lingers in the background. Theobromine can also contribute to chocolate's bitterness, although it is not the only source of that taste. Its presence is part of why a rich, dark bar can feel satisfying in a different way than a sugary candy. There is also a dose element. The more cocoa solids in the chocolate, the more likely you are to notice theobromine's effect. It is not a dramatic buzz for most people. It is more like a quiet brightness that hangs around after the last bite. Dogs process theobromine poorly, which is why chocolate can harm them. What feels pleasant to humans can be dangerous to dogs, and chocolate is a classic example. Dogs break down theobromine much more slowly than we do, so the compound can build up in their system. The risk depends on the dog's size, the type of chocolate, and how much was eaten. Dark chocolate and baking chocolate tend to be far more concentrated than milk chocolate, which is why a small amount can matter. This is not about chocolate being poison in a dramatic sense. It is about a mismatch in metabolism. Signs of trouble can include restlessness, vomiting, rapid heartbeat, and more serious symptoms in severe cases. The safest rule is simple and strict. Do not share chocolate with dogs, even if they beg and even if they seem fine afterward. If a dog eats chocolate, it is worth contacting a veterinarian or poison helpline quickly, because timing can change outcomes. A pinch of salt can sharpen sweetness without making chocolate taste salty. Salt is not only a seasoning, it is a signal booster. In small amounts, it can reduce the perception of bitterness and make sweetness feel clearer, which is why a tiny pinch can make chocolate seem more chocolatey. It also helps draw attention to aroma, because the brain tends to experience flavors as more vivid when balance improves. This is why salted chocolate does not have to taste like a snack food. It can taste smoother, rounder, and more focused. There is a craft element too. The type of salt changes the experience. Fine salt dissolves quickly and disappears into the melt. Flaky salt can create little bursts of contrast that wake up the tongue. Either approach can be beautiful when used carefully. The key is restraint. Too much salt crowds out delicate notes and turns the whole bar into a single loud idea. With the right touch, salt acts like a spotlight, not a takeover. Chili and cacao pair well, echoing ancient flavor traditions. Chocolate and chili can feel like opposites, but they share a common talent. Both can carry warmth that spreads through the mouth and chest. When they meet, the heat of chili can make chocolate's roasted notes feel deeper, while the richness of cocoa can soften chili's sharp edges. The result is not just spicy chocolate. It is a layered sensation, where sweetness arrives first, then warmth follows, then aroma rises again as you breathe out. The pairing also has history, which gives it emotional weight. Long before chocolate became a candy bar, cacao was often consumed in bold, savory preparations that welcomed spice. Modern versions sometimes lean on chili as a gimmick, The best versions treat it as choreography. You want the heat to arrive late, like a slow closing door, so the cocoa has time to speak. When it is done well, chili does not cover chocolate. It reveals a different side of it. Vanilla can amplify chocolate's sweetness, even at very low amounts. Vanilla is powerful because it works like a translator between flavors. A trace can make sweetness feel warmer and more rounded, even when the sugar level stays the same. It can also soften harsh edges, so cocoa tastes smoother without losing depth. This is why some chocolatiers use vanilla with great care. Too much, and it becomes the main voice, turning different bars into the same familiar profile. Just enough, and it acts like a frame around a painting, helping you notice what is already there. Vanilla can also influence aroma perception. It adds a comforting association that many people learned early in life through desserts and baked goods. That memory effect can make chocolate feel richer and more satisfying than the ingredient list would predict. The fascinating part is how invisible the trick can be. You might not think, "This tastes like vanilla." You might only think, "This tastes better." That is vanilla doing quiet work. Roasted cacao can taste like berries, honey, nuts, or tobacco notes. Chocolate can be a flavor travel ticket, and the destination can surprise you. One bar might open with a bright tang that feels like red fruit. Another might drift toward honeyed warmth. Another might lean into toasted nuts, or a darker, drier note that people describe as tobacco-like. These are not added flavors in many well-made bars. They are perceptions created by aroma compounds interacting with your brain's library of past smells. That is why tasting chocolate is partly sensory and partly personal. Two people can agree it is delicious, then describe it differently. The best way to catch these notes is to slow down. Let the piece melt and breathe out through your nose as it warms. Notice what appears at the start, in the middle, and in the finish. Chocolate is not only sweet and bitter. It can be vivid, almost like fruit, and it can shift while you are still tasting it. That movement is part of the wonder. One small change in cocoa butter crystals decides snap, shine, and melt. Chocolate can be made from the same ingredients and still behave like two different worlds. The difference often comes down to how the fat solidifies. Cocoa butter can set into several crystal arrangements, and each one has its own personality. One type looks glossy and breaks cleanly. Another looks dull and soft, and it can crumble instead of snapping. The trick is that these forms are not chosen by labels or wishes. They are guided by temperature history. Warm it too much, and you erase the structure. Cool it the wrong way, and you encourage unstable forms. Tempering is the art of steering the chocolate toward the crystal that gives the satisfying finish, the crisp sound, and the smooth melt. This is why a chocolatier can care about a few degrees like a musician cares about tuning. A tiny shift can change the entire bite. Cacao trees can only grow where the air stays warm year-round. Cacao is picky in a way that shapes world history. It thrives close to the equator, in places where temperatures stay steady and the air holds moisture for much of the year. Too much cold can stall growth. Too much heat can stress the tree. Even wind can be a problem, because cacao evolved under forest canopies where the air moves softly and sunlight arrives in filtered patches. That narrow comfort zone is why cacao maps look like a band around the planet. It also means chocolate depends on specific landscapes and communities, not just on factories. A change in rainfall timing can shift flowering. A longer dry season can shrink pod size. When you taste chocolate, you are tasting a crop that lives within strict limits, and those limits make it both precious and vulnerable. Each cacao pod hides seeds that must ferment before tasting chocolatey. Fresh cacao seeds are not the flavor you expect. If you bite one straight from the pod, it is bitter and astringent, more like a plant defending itself than a dessert ingredient. The first step toward chocolate is a deliberate pause in the life of the seed. Farmers heap the wet seeds and pulp together, cover them, and let time do its work. Heat builds from within, and the seed's internal chemistry starts to shift. That shift matters because it lays the groundwork for what roasting can later reveal. Without this stage, chocolate can taste thin, sharp, and oddly flat, even if the beans look fine from the outside. The pod may be the fruit you see, but the hidden work begins after it is opened, in warm piles that smell sweet, sour, and alive. Fermentation creates hundreds of flavor chemicals before any roasting happens. It can be hard to believe that a warm heap of fruit and seeds is already building the future aroma of chocolate. Yet this is where complexity starts. Microbes feed on the sugary pulp and release a cascade of new molecules. Some will later smell like flowers. Others lean toward nuts, caramel, or dried fruit. Heat rises, acidity shifts, and the seed responds from the inside out. By the time the beans are dried, they already carry the blueprint of their eventual character. Roasting does not invent those notes from nothing. It develops what this earlier stage set in motion. That is why two farms can roast the same way and still produce wildly different results. Part of the difference is the invisible community doing chemistry in the dark, long before a bean ever reaches a roaster. Tiny midges, not bees, do most cacao pollination. Cacao flowers are small and intricate, and they are not built for the busy traffic of big pollinators. Instead, cacao often depends on midges, tiny flies that thrive in damp leaf litter and shaded spaces. They are so small that a light breeze can redirect them, and that randomness is part of the story. Even in a healthy grove, many flowers will never become pods because pollination is delicate. This gives cacao farming an almost surprising dependency on the forest floor. If the ground dries out, or if the habitat becomes too clean and exposed, midge populations can drop. Some growers encourage the right conditions by protecting shade, maintaining moisture, and leaving organic material where these insects breed. In a way, a chocolate bar begins with a nearly invisible flight, happening at the scale of crumbs and dew. Ancient Mesoamericans drank cacao as a bitter, frothy, spiced beverage. For many early cacao drinkers, sweetness was not the point. The drink could be strong, earthy, and sharp, then lifted with spices that warmed the throat and sharpened the senses. What made it famous was often the foam. People learned that pouring the liquid from height again and again could raise a thick froth that felt luxurious on the lips. That foam was not decoration. It changed texture and aroma, and it turned a simple drink into an experience worth ceremony. Cacao could also carry social meaning, offered in gatherings where food was never only about hunger. When chocolate later became a solid bar, it carried echoes of that older world, where cacao was closer to a ritual than a snack. The next time you smell chocolate before you taste it, imagine a cup first, not a wrapper. Cacao beans were once used as money, traded like everyday coins. A good currency has to be countable, portable, and hard to fake. And cacao beans fit the role in a surprisingly practical way. They could be measured by the handful. They were small enough to carry. They had clear value because people wanted them for food and drink. That meant cacao could move through markets as a tool for trade, not only as an ingredient. It is a strange thought, because it flips modern expectations. Today we treat chocolate as a reward after real life. In those older systems, cacao was part of real life itself, sitting beside tools, textiles, and daily necessities. Using food as money also reveals how precious cacao was. You do not spend something casually if it takes land, labor, and careful handling to produce. In every bean, there was both taste and purchasing power, held in the same small brown shell. Cacao flowers are so small, many bloom right on the trunk. If you walk through a cacao grove at the right moment, the tree can look sprinkled with tiny stars. The blossoms are delicate, waxy, and only about the size of a fingernail. Many appear straight from the trunk and older branches, as if the tree is decorating its own bark. That placement is practical. It lets the tree support heavy pods later without relying on thin twigs that would snap under the weight. It also turns the trunk into a busy corridor for insects that creep and flutter close to the surface. The timing is brief too. A flower can be ready for pollination for only a short window, and then it moves on. This is one reason cacao feels almost secretive. It does not shout with big petals. It quietly does its most important work close to the wood. Most cacao blossoms never become pods, even in healthy orchards. A cacao tree can produce thousands of flowers and still deliver only a modest number of pods. That sounds wasteful until you realize what a pod demands. It is a heavy, slow-growing package of seeds and pulp that will hang for months, drawing energy from the tree the entire time. The plant is cautious. It opens opportunities, then commits only when conditions seem right. Pollination is one filter, because the flower's structure is tricky and success is fragile. Weather is another filter, because too much rain can interrupt pollen transfer and too little moisture can stress the tree. Even after a flower is fertilized, the young pod can be dropped if resources tighten. Farmers watch this like a suspense story. A branch can promise abundance one week, then quietly thin its own future the next. Chocolate begins with that uncertainty, long before any harvest basket fills. A cacao pod can ripen for months, hanging like a living lantern. After pollination, cacao does not hurry. The pod swells slowly, shifting color as it matures. Some varieties move from green to yellow. Others deepen toward orange or red. Growers learn to read these changes with the care of someone checking fruit on a single tree, not a whole aisle of produce. Ripeness matters because it sets the balance of sugars in the pulp and the readiness of the seeds inside. Pick too early, and the flavors can struggle later. Pick too late, and pests and rot get more chances. This is why harvest is often done by hand, pod by pod, with a blade that avoids cutting the tree's cushions where new flowers will emerge. A single pod is not a quick prize. It is a long investment, dangling in plain sight. Inside each pod, sweet white pulp feeds the microbes of fermentation. When a pod is opened, the first taste you meet is the pulp, not the seed. It is bright and fruity, and it clings like a soft jelly around each bean. That pulp is more than a snack. It is fuel. Once the beans are piled together, the sugars and moisture create a perfect starting point for microbial activity. Farmers manage this with simple, powerful choices. They might use wooden boxes that hold heat, or banana leaves that keep the mass covered and warm. They turn the beans at certain moments to bring in oxygen and keep the process moving. Even the drainage matters, because excess liquid can drown the pile and slow the change. The pulp is the spark that lets fermentation ignite reliably. Without it, the beans would dry as plain seeds. With it, they enter a transformation that can be guided but never fully controlled. Yeasts start fermentation first, making alcohol long before acidity rises. At the beginning, The pile smells surprisingly like fruit. Yeasts move in fast because they love sugar and low oxygen. They feast on the pulp and release alcohol and heat, and the temperature of the mass begins to climb. This early stage is fleeting, but it sets the pace. If the pile stays too cool, the next steps may never fully develop. If it heats unevenly, some beans can lag behind while others surge ahead. Skilled fermenters pay attention to sensory clues rather than instruments alone. They notice when the aroma shifts from fresh fruit towards something deeper and warmer. They listen for the change in sound when beans are moved and liquid drains away. This is the moment when cacao starts acting less like produce and more like a living workshop. The alcohol is not the destination. It is the opening act that makes the rest possible. Bacteria then turn alcohol into acids, reshaping flavor and safety. Once oxygen enters the fermenting mass, a new caste takes over. Bacteria that thrive in airy, warm conditions begin converting alcohol into acids. That shift changes everything. The rising acidity helps break down the bean's internal structure, and it pushes biochemical reactions that prepare flavor precursors for later roasting. It also discourages some unwanted microbes that could spoil the batch. The smell changes again, becoming sharper and more pungent, and the beans themselves begin to look different. Their color moves away from a raw, pale tone toward deeper browns as the seed's living systems shut down. That matters because a bean that stays alive behaves like a seed, not like an ingredient. This stage is one reason fermentation is so carefully timed. Too little acid development can leave the flavor thin. Too much can make the final chocolate feel harsh. The best batches find a narrow middle path. Poor fermentation can flatten chocolate, even if the beans look perfect. From the outside, many beans appear fine. The real truth is often hidden inside, and makers have a way to check it. They do a simple cup test, slicing beans open to examine color and texture. Well-fermented beans show a pleasing range of browns, and a structure that suggests the seed's chemistry has changed. Under-fermented beans can look slaty or gray, and they often carry a stubborn bitterness that roasting cannot magically erase. Over-fermented beans can pick up funky notes that crowd out more delicate aromas. This is why chocolate quality is not only about origin or variety. It is about process discipline. The fermentation site might need better airflow. Turning might need different timing. Even the thickness of the pile matters because it controls heat. A buyer can pay premium prices for beautiful-looking sacks, then discover the flavor has no lift. The mistake happened earlier, in the invisible stage. Roasting drives off sharp acids and unlocks deep, knotty notes. Roasting is where cacao becomes aromatic in a way you can smell from across a room. Heat pushes out some of the sharper acids formed during fermentation and drying, and it also sets off browning reactions that build warmer, toastier flavors. This is not a single setting that suits every bean. A lighter roast can preserve bright, fruity tones. A deeper roast can emphasize cocoa richness and roasted nut character. The craft is in matching the roast to what the beans already contain, rather than forcing everything into one flavor. Roasters watch for changes in aroma, color, and sound. They cool beans quickly to stop the reactions at the right moment. Done well, roasting does not cover the bean's story. It reveals it. Done poorly, it can scorch away nuance, leaving only bitterness. This step is why chocolate can taste elegant in one bar and blunt in another, even with similar ingredients. Cocoa nibs are simply roasted beans cracked into fragrant pieces. After roasting, beans still wear a papery shell that you do not want in a silky bar. The next step is winnowing, where cracked beans are separated from their husks. What remains are nibs, small shards that smell intensely of cacao and toast. They are a crossroads ingredient. You can grind them into chocolate, or you can use them as a crunchy garnish on desserts, oatmeal, or yogurt. Some people even steep nibs like tea to make a cocoa infusion that smells like brownies while staying unsweetened. Nibs can also reveal quality quickly. A good nib tastes clean and complex, and it leaves a pleasant finish. A flawed nib can taste smoky, overly sour, or hollow. In that way, nibs are the honest middle stage of chocolate making. They are close enough to the source to show what the bean really is, and refined enough to be enjoyed on their own. Grinding nibs makes cocoa liquor, a paste that flows with heat. When nibs are ground, something surprising happens. They stop behaving like dry crumbs and begin to flow like a thick liquid. That is because grinding releases cocoa butter and friction adds warmth until the mixture becomes a smooth paste called cocoa liquor. It is not alcoholic. It is simply cacao in a fluid form. This stage is where texture begins to be engineered. The paste can be refined so particles become tiny enough to feel velvety instead of gritty. The way it flows matters too, because it determines how easily chocolate can be molded into bars or coated onto candies. Makers can adjust the process to keep certain aromas bright or to build deeper roasted notes. You can think of cocoa liquor as the moment cacao becomes programmable. The bean story is still there, but now it can be shaped into many textures and styles. It is the bridge between agriculture and the final snap. The most stable cocoa butter crystal makes chocolate glossy and crisp. Not all solid chocolate is solid in the same way. Cocoa butter can organize itself into different crystal patterns, and only one of them gives the classic finish people recognize. When that stable form dominates, the surface reflects light cleanly, so the bar looks polished even before you taste it. The texture changes too. It breaks with a clean, confident bite, and it resists crumbling into dusty fragments. It also melts in a more orderly way, so the mouthfeel feels smooth instead of waxy. The fascinating part is how small the difference is. The ingredients do not need to change. The storage does not need to change. The only change can be how the chocolate cooled and reset after melting. That invisible architecture decides whether a bar looks like a jewel or like a smudged stone. Tempering is controlled crystallization, not a mysterious chef's ritual. It looks like a performance, but it is really a plan. Chocolate is guided through a temperature journey so the right crystals form in the right proportion. Some chocolatiers spread it across a cool slab and work it with scrapers, watching how it thickens and shines. Others use machines that warm, cool, and rewarm with steady precision. Either way, the goal is the same. You create a small population of desirable crystals, then encourage them to multiply while the rest are discouraged. When it is done well, the chocolate behaves predictably in molds and coatings, and it sets with a professional finish. When it is rushed, the surface can look dull or streaked, and the texture can feel soft in the wrong places. Tempering is not magic. It is the art of steering a material that remembers its thermal past. Conching can take hours or days, smoothing texture and rounding flavor. Conching is one of the strangest steps in food making because it is basically controlled rubbing for a very long time. Chocolate is kept warm while paddles or rollers push and fold it over and over until it changes character. The texture improvement is easy to imagine. Tiny particles get coated more evenly in fat, so the mixture begins to feel silky instead of powdery. The flavor change is more subtle, and it is why makers obsess over the duration. Early on, chocolate can taste tight and aggressive. With time, those edges soften. The taste becomes more cohesive, like an orchestra that has finally started playing together. The process also changes how the chocolate flows, which matters for molding and enrobing. Some makers stop conching early to keep bold, rustic notes. Others go longer for a smoother, quieter profile. The same batch can become different personalities, simply by time and motion. During conching, harsh volatiles escape, making aroma feel softer. Some aromas are wonderful at low levels and exhausting at high levels. After fermentation and roasting, chocolate can carry sharp, volatile compounds that smell too vinegary or too smoky. Conching gives them an exit. The chocolate is held warm and moving, which increases the chance that those light molecules will evaporate into the air. Makers sometimes ventilate the space or adjust airflow, because conching is partly about letting the chocolate breathe. What remains can feel more balanced. Fruity notes become clearer. Roasty notes become less abrasive. Even sweetness can seem cleaner, because fewer sharp aromas are fighting for attention. This is why a chocolate that tastes rough at first can become elegant without adding anything new. The transformation is subtraction, not decoration. It is the slow removal of distractions. Conching is like polishing a lens. You are not painting a new picture. You are clearing away haze so the picture can finally be seen. Dark chocolate can contain only cocoa solids, cocoa butter, and sugar. That simplicity is part of its appeal. With just those components, the bar becomes a direct conversation between cacao character and sweetness level. Cocoa solids bring deep flavor and color. Cocoa butter brings texture and melt. Sugar sets the balance, and it can either highlight subtle notes or cover them. This is why ingredient lists matter. A short list often means the maker is asking you to taste the bean itself, not a long recipe. It also means percentages can be meaningful, because the bar has fewer places to hide. A high cocoa percentage can be intense, but intensity is not the same as quality. If the cacao is aromatic and well handled, even a lower percentage can taste complex. If the cacao is harsh, more cocoa can make that harshness louder. Dark chocolate at its best is minimal, and that minimalism leaves nowhere for craft to cheat. Milk chocolate adds milk solids, which mellow bitterness and add caramel notes. Milk changes chocolate in a way you can feel immediately. Bitterness often softens because milk proteins combined with some of the cacao compounds that taste sharp, and the overall impression becomes rounder. Milk also brings its own sweetness, not only from added sugar, but from lactose, which has a gentler taste. Then there is the toasty character. Milk powders can develop warm, cooked notes during processing, and those notes blend with cacao's roasted tones in a way that many people describe as caramel-like. Texture shifts too. Milk chocolate can feel plush and creamy, even at cooler temperatures, because the whole mixture is less stark. This is why milk chocolate is often a first love. It is approachable, but it can still be sophisticated when the cacao is expressive and the recipe is well tuned. A great milk chocolate does not hide cacao. It reframes it with warmth. White chocolate contains cocoa butter, but no cocoa solids at all. That single omission changes everything you taste. Without cocoa solids, you lose the deep brown flavors people associate with chocolate, and what remains is the cacao seed's creamy fat. That fat is naturally aromatic, but it is subtle. It can smell like warm dairy even when there is no milk, and it can carry notes that feel like honey or toasted nuts depending on how it is handled. Because the flavor is quieter, every added ingredient becomes louder. Vanilla can dominate. Sugar can turn it cloying. Even a small pinch of salt can transform it. White chocolate is also a texture showcase. When it is made well, it melts cleanly and leaves no waxy drag. When it is made poorly, it can taste flat and sugary. It is less a cocoa showcase and more a cocoa butter spotlight, which is its own kind of surprise. Cocoa powder is what remains after pressing out much of the fat. Imagine taking chocolate's richness and turning down the volume, while keeping the aroma turned up. That is the role of cocoa powder. It begins as a thick cocoa paste, and then pressure forces much of the cocoa butter away. What is left becomes a dry cake that can be milled into fine powder. This changes how it behaves in your kitchen. Cocoa powder disperses into liquids without bringing much fat, so it can build deep flavor without making a recipe greasy. It also makes bitterness easier to notice, because there is less cocoa butter to soften edges. That is why cocoa powder can taste intense even when it is not sweet. In baking, it can color a cake almost black and perfume a room with a smell that feels like dessert before the first bite. It is chocolate's essence in a lighter, more versatile form, created by force and separation. Dutch processing makes cocoa less acidic and darkens its color. Some cocoa powders taste bright and sharp. Others taste smoother and darker, and that difference often comes from one choice. Dutch processing treats cocoa with an alkaline solution, which reduces acidity and shifts flavor. The powder can become more mellow, and its color deepens toward a richer brown. That change is not only cosmetic. It affects how cocoa behaves in recipes, especially where acidity matters for leavening. It can also change the way we perceive chocolate itself, because we often associate darker color with deeper flavor, even when sweetness stays the same. Many classic baked goods lean on Dutch cocoa for that familiar, rounded chocolate taste. It is a reminder that chocolate is not a single flavor locked in nature. It is a material that can be tuned. One processing step can move it from zippy and bright to smooth and almost smoky before it ever meets sugar. Natural cocoa stays brighter in flavor, often tasting fruitier. When cocoa is not alkalized, it keeps more of its natural acidity, and that can make it feel lively. Instead of a heavy, dark profile, it can lean toward tangy notes that hint at berries or citrus. This can surprise people who think chocolate is supposed to taste only like roast and caramel. Natural cocoa can also taste more direct, like you are closer to the bean's original personality. In recipes, that brightness can make chocolate desserts feel less muddy and more defined. It can lift the taste of banana bread, sharpen the edge of brownies, or make a chocolate cake feel lighter on the palate. It also interacts differently with baking soda and baking powder, which is why swapping cocoa types can change rise and texture. Natural cocoa is a good reminder that chocolate flavor has a spectrum. Some versions rumble like thunder. Others sparkle a little, and they do it without any added flavoring. Chocolate's bitterness comes from polyphenols, not from theobromine alone. People often blame theobromine for bitterness because it is famous, but the taste you call bitter is usually a chorus, not a solo. Polyphenols are one of the loudest sections of that chorus. They are plant compounds that can taste astringent and sharp, especially when cocoa is minimally sweetened. They also contribute to that drying sensation some dark chocolates leave behind. What makes this fascinating is how flexible the outcome can be. Fermentation, drying, and roasting all shape polyphenol levels and how harsh they feel. Even sugar is not just a sweet mask. It changes how your tongue interprets bitterness. That is why two dark bars with similar percentages can feel wildly different. One can taste elegant and balanced. Another can taste like a challenge. Bitterness is not a single ingredient's fault. It is the result of how a plant defends itself, and how humans choose to transform that defense into pleasure. Some cacao varieties taste naturally floral, without added flavors. It can feel like magic when a chocolate bar tastes faintly like jasmine or orange blossom, and then you realize nobody added flowers. Those aromas can come from the bean itself, shaped by genetics and careful post-harvest work. In some varieties, the underlying chemistry leans toward compounds that our brains interpret as floral. If fermentation is clean and well-timed, those delicate notes survive. If roasting is too heavy, they can vanish in a cloud of toast. That is why makers who chase floral profiles often roast with restraint, and they avoid overpowering additions. Tasting a floral cacao can feel like listening closely. The notes often appear in the middle of the melt, then drift away into a sweet finish. It is also a reminder that chocolate is not one flavor with different sugar levels. It can be as aromatic and nuanced as fruit, tea, or perfume, and it can achieve that on its own. Others taste earthy and bored, shaped by soil and fermentation. Some chocolates do not whisper. They arrive with the weight of dark bread crust, damp wood, roasted nuts, and deep cocoa. Those bold profiles can be shaped by the minerals and organic matter in the soil, because the tree draws its building blocks from the ground. They are also shaped by fermentation choices that push the flavor toward heavier tones. Longer fermentation, warmer piles, or different turning rhythms can favor deeper, more robust compounds. When people say a chocolate tastes earthy, they often mean it feels grounded, like a flavor with gravity. It can pair beautifully with coffee, red wine, or smoky teas because it holds its own. These chocolates can also be more forgiving in baking, since their strong base survives heat and sugar. The most intriguing part is that earthy is not a defect when it is clean. It is a style, like a bold roast. It tells you the bean's story took a darker path, and it did it with intention. Single-origin chocolate can reflect one region's microbes and climate. When chocolate is labeled from a single origin, it is often an invitation to taste place. Cacao does not ferment in a sterile lab. It ferments in open air, with local yeasts and bacteria landing on the pulp and multiplying. Those microbes can differ from valley to valley, and they can push flavor in distinct directions. Climate matters too. Humidity changes drying speed. Rainfall patterns change harvest timing. Even nighttime temperatures can affect how quickly fermentation heats and cools. Put those together, and you can get a chocolate that tastes unmistakably like its home, even when the recipe stays simple. That is why some bars carry surprising notes, like tropical fruit brightness, spicy warmth, or a nutty depth that feels familiar. It is not marketing alone. It is agriculture meeting microbiology, then bottled into a bar. Single origin is not a promise of quality by itself. It is a promise of specificity, and specificity can be thrilling when the craft is careful. Cacao is unusually sensitive to pests, making farming a constant battle. Cacao trees live in a world where a tiny bite can have outsized consequences. Insects can pierce pods, fungi can invade wounds, and a small problem can spread through an orchard faster than you would expect. Farmers often walk their trees the way a gardener checks roses, scanning for early signs before trouble multiplies. If a pod is damaged, it can become a doorway for rot, and that can ruin seeds that took months to develop. Some growers prune to improve airflow because damp, still air can favor outbreaks. Others remove infected pods quickly, even when it hurts to discard them, because leaving one sick pod can risk many healthy ones. The result is that chocolate depends on vigilance, not only on sunshine. Each harvest reflects countless small decisions made under pressure, and that tension is part of why cacao feels precious. Many cacao trees are grown under shade, copying the forest canopy. Cacao did not evolve as a lone tree standing in full blazing sun. It began as an understory plant, used to dappled light and a calmer microclimate. Shade trees can recreate that protective ceiling, lowering heat stress and reducing sudden swings in temperature. They also slow the drying of soil, which can matter in regions where rain arrives in bursts rather than steady patterns. In a shaded grove, cacao leaves often look healthier through hot afternoons, and the air can feel cooler even a few steps apart. Shade management is also a balancing act. Too much shade can reduce flowering and yield. Too little can expose the trees to scorch and strain. Farmers choose species that fit their land, sometimes planting fruit or timber trees that add extra income. When shade is done well, the farm begins to resemble a managed forest, and chocolate becomes a crop grown with architecture, not just agriculture. Shade-grown cacao can protect wildlife when managed thoughtfully. A cacao farm can be more than rows of trees. With diverse shade and careful ground cover, it can become a corridor for birds, insects, and small mammals that need connected habitat. You might hear more songbirds and see more butterflies because the layered vegetation offers food and shelter. Predatory insects can also benefit, and they may help reduce certain pest pressures naturally. The key is that shade grown is not an automatic promise. It depends on how the farm is designed and maintained. A single shade species planted like a uniform ceiling is different from a mixed canopy with flowering trees, leaf litter, and varied heights. Thoughtful farms can also protect waterways by reducing erosion and slowing runoff. In that kind of system, cacao is not an isolated crop. It is a participant in a living landscape, and the chocolate it produces is tied to more than human appetite. Cacao genetics are surprisingly diverse, yet commercial supply is often narrow. In the wild and in traditional growing regions, cacao shows a wide range of forms and flavors. Some trees produce pods with thick shells. Others have pods with different colors, shapes, and seed counts. That genetic variety can influence aroma, disease resistance, and how a tree handles drought or heat. Yet the global market often relies on a smaller set of widely planted types, partly because consistent yield is easier to finance and predict. This creates a quiet risk. When many farms depend on similar genetics, a new disease or a shifting climate can hit harder because fewer trees carry natural resistance. It also narrows the flavor palette available to chocolate makers. Preserving and using diverse cacao is like keeping a library open. Each variety is a different book, and some books contain traits we may need urgently in the future. Genetics might sound distant from your dessert. In cacao, it can decide what chocolate will be possible a generation from now. Criollo cacao is rare and prized, often gentler and less bitter. Criollo is famous in chocolate circles because it can produce a softer profile, with less harshness when it is well handled. It is also known for being harder to grow in many settings, which contributes to its rarity. For a farmer, rarity is not romance. It can mean lower yield, greater vulnerability, and more risk in a livelihood already shaped by weather and pests. For a chocolate maker, it can mean a chance to craft a bar that feels refined, where subtle notes can show themselves without being pushed into the background by bitterness. When people describe a Criollo-based chocolate as elegant, they often mean the flavors arrive with less friction. That does not guarantee greatness. Post-harvest care still matters, and poor handling can waste even an excellent bean. But when conditions align, Criollo can feel like a quiet conversation rather than a loud performance, and that is why it is sought after. Forastero cacao dominates global production, valued for hardiness and yield. Most of the world's chocolate is built on Forastero, and that is not an accident. Farmers often rely on trees that can produce reliably and tolerate tougher conditions. Forastero types are widely used because they tend to be robust and they can deliver the volumes that large supply chains demand. That practical strength has shaped the everyday chocolate people recognize, from candy bars to baking cocoa. Yet dominance does not mean dullness. With careful fermentation and roasting, Forastero can carry pleasing complexity, including deep cocoa richness and satisfying roasted notes. The difference is that its strengths often show up as structure and intensity rather than delicate perfume. In some blends, Forastero provides the backbone that supports more aromatic beans, the way a steady drumbeat supports a melody. When you think about chocolate as a global food, Forastero is the workhorse that made it possible for chocolate to become familiar, not rare. Trinitario cacao began as a hybrid, blending resilience with aroma. Trinitario is often described as a bridge between worlds. It emerged from a mix of cacao lineages, and growers valued it because it could combine sturdier growth with appealing flavor potential. That balance matters because farmers need trees that survive, and makers want beans that sing. In a good Trinitario chocolate, you can find a pleasing middle ground. The cocoa base can be strong, while brighter notes still appear during the melt. It is also a reminder that cacao is not frozen in time. People have been shaping these trees through selection and planting choices for generations, responding to storms, disease pressures, and market demand. A hybrid is not just a scientific concept. It is a human answer to a problem created in orchards rather than laboratories. When you taste a chocolate that feels both sturdy and expressive, you may be tasting that history of adaptation, built into the tree's genetics and carried through craft. Cacao diseases can erase harvests, pushing farmers to abandon orchards. A cacao orchard is not a quick crop. Trees take years to become productive, and farmers invest time, pruning, and care long before the first meaningful harvest. That is why disease can be so devastating. A serious outbreak can wipe out pods, weaken trees, and drain the hope that next season will recover. When losses repeat, families may have to make painful choices. They might switch to another crop, migrate for work, or leave land untended. Abandoned orchards can become sources of reinfection for nearby farms, which adds pressure to whole regions. Recovery often requires replanting, and replanting means waiting again. This is one reason the chocolate you see on a shelf is connected to long timelines and real vulnerability. Behind the smooth bar is a crop that can be interrupted by forces a farmer cannot fully control. Disease management is not only biology, it is survival planning. Cacao pods can grow directly from bark, a trait called cauliflory. There is something startling about seeing fruit sprout from a tree's trunk, as if the bark itself decided to bloom. This growth style allows cacao to support heavy pods close to the tree's strongest wood, rather than risking thin branches. It also changes how harvesting works. Farmers can reach pods along the trunk and main limbs, using tools that cut the stem cleanly without injuring the tree's flowering points. Those points can produce again, so careful cuts protect future seasons. Cauliflory also creates a special kind of visibility. Pods do not hide in leafy tips far overhead. They hang where you can watch them swell and change color, almost like ornaments you check each day. This trait is not just a botanical curiosity. It is a structural solution that lets cacao carry weight safely over months. The tree is built for patience, and its fruit grows in the most stable place it can find. Chocolate's aroma comes from hundreds of compounds, far beyond cocoa alone. When you smell chocolate, you are not smelling one thing. You are smelling a crowded city of molecules that formed across many steps, then gathered into one warm impression. Some compounds suggest roasted bread. Others hint at fruit, nuts, spice, or flowers. Your brain stitches them into a single word, chocolate, even though it is more like a chord than a note. What makes this even more fascinating is that the mix can change dramatically with small choices. A few degrees in roasting can tilt the balance toward toast or toward brightness. A longer dry can mute one set of aromas and lift another. Even storage matters, because aroma compounds can fade or shift over time. That is why 2 bars can both be called dark chocolate, yet smell like 2 different worlds. The label is simple. The chemistry is wildly busy. Chocolate's fat can carry aromas upward, making flavor feel louder. Flavor is partly chemistry and partly timing, and fat controls timing beautifully. Many aroma compounds dissolve well in fats, which means cocoa butter can hold them, transport them, and release them in a slower, more sustained way. That is one reason chocolate can seem to bloom in stages. You might notice one note at first, then another appears as the chocolate warms and spreads. Fat also creates a coating that can extend the finish, so the aroma lingers after the chocolate is gone. This is not only about intensity, it is about shape. A low-fat chocolate can deliver flavor in a quick burst, then drop off abruptly. A well-balanced fat profile can make the experience feel fuller and longer, almost like a song with a clear beginning and a long fading final chord. That carry effect is why texture and aroma are inseparable in chocolate. Change the fat behavior, and the flavor story changes too. Cocoa butter has a narrow melting range, so it turns liquid quickly. That quick shift is why chocolate can feel firm in your fingers, then suddenly silky in your mouth. Cocoa butter changes phase over a tight band of temperatures, so a small rise in warmth makes a big difference. It also means chocolate is sensitive to its surroundings. A bar left near a sunny window can soften sooner than you expect, while the same bar in a cool cupboard stays crisp and snappy. This narrow melting behavior is not only about pleasure, it is also about performance. It affects how chocolate coats fruit, how it sets on a truffle, and how long it holds its shape in your hand. When makers choose recipes, they are thinking about melt as much as taste. They want a texture that yields at the right moment, then carries aroma upward as it goes. That is engineering you can feel, happening in seconds. Cooling chocolate too fast can trap unstable crystals and dull the snap. Chocolate needs time to settle into a strong internal structure, and rushing that cooling can leave it half-organized. When the temperature drops too quickly, cocoa butter can form crystal types that look acceptable at first, but do not hold their shape well. The surface may lose shine, and the break can feel soft or crumbly instead of clean. You might even notice that the chocolate melts in an uneven way, with a waxy drag that interrupts the smooth glide you expect. This is why chocolatiers pay attention to cooling rooms, cooling tunnels, and even the temperature of molds. The goal is not simply to make chocolate hard. The goal is to let the right crystals grow in an orderly way, like careful stacking rather than a hurried pile. A good snap is not a sound effect. It is a sign that the invisible architecture had time to form properly. Properly tempered chocolate contract slightly, helping it release from molds. There is a small moment of relief in a chocolate kitchen when a mold is tapped and the pieces fall out cleanly. That easy release is often a sign that the chocolate cooled into the right crystal structure. As it sets, well-tempered chocolate shrinks just a little, and that tiny contraction pulls it away from the mold's surface. The result is not only practical, it also affects appearance. Edges come out sharp, details show clearly, and the surface keeps its gloss. When temper is off, chocolate can cling stubbornly, and it can leave smears or dull patches that look tired before anyone takes a bite. This is why molding is a quiet test of skill. The chocolate has to be coaxed into behaving like a solid that knows how to let go. When it does, the piece feels like it was born cleanly, not forced into shape. The snap you hear is a mechanical signature of crystal structure. That crisp break is not just satisfying. It is information. When you bite into a well-set bar, the sound comes from a solid network that fractures in a clean, brittle way. If the crystal network is strong and uniform, it breaks sharply and the sound is bright. If the structure is softer or disorganized, the bar may bend, crumble, or break with a dull thud. Your ears pick up what your fingers would notice too. Snap is a little physics lesson you can taste. It also connects to how chocolate melts. A bar with a strong crystal structure can still melt quickly, but it melts with a smoother transition. That combination is part of what people call quality, even if they never say the word crystals. The next time you hear that break, notice how your brain trusts it. The sound tells you something about what is coming, before the flavor even arrives. Chocolate's smoothness depends on particle size, not only on ingredients. You can use wonderful cacao and still end up with chocolate that feels gritty, because texture is built at a microscopic scale. Chocolate contains solid particles, like cocoa solids and sugar, suspended in fat. If those particles are too large, your tongue reads them as sand. If they are fine enough, the same recipe feels like velvet. This is why refining matters. Makers run chocolate through rollers or mills that gradually reduce particle size, and they aim for a threshold where the mouth stops noticing individual grains. The fascinating part is how the experience changes without changing flavor. The same aromas can suddenly feel louder because a smooth texture lets them spread evenly. Smoothness also changes how long a piece seems to last, because it melts and coats more uniformly. It is a reminder that taste is not only chemistry in the nose. It is also touch. Chocolate is eaten with the tongue as much as with the brain. Gritty chocolate often means sugar particles stayed too large. Sugar is sweet, but it is also a solid that can behave like tiny pebbles if it is not refined enough. When those particles remain large, they can scrape against the tongue, and the chocolate feels rough even if the cacao is good. This roughness can also change the flavor impression. Sweetness can feel sharper because the sugar hits in concentrated bursts rather than dissolving smoothly across the mouth. In some cases, the grittiness is not from sugar alone. It can come from cocoa solids that were not ground fine enough or from an uneven blend. Still, sugar is often the main culprit because its crystals start out large and angular. Skilled makers treat refinement as a form of patience. They give the chocolate enough time and pressure to become a true suspension, not a sweet gravel mixture held together by fat. When the texture turns silky, the sweetness feels calmer, and the whole bar becomes easier to listen to. Some makers add extra cocoa butter to make chocolate silkier. Cocoa butter is more than a flavor carrier. It is a texture tool. When a maker increases it slightly, the chocolate can flow more smoothly during production, and it can feel more luxurious when it melts. Extra cocoa butter helps particles slide past each other, so the bar can seem creamier even without adding dairy. It can also change how the chocolate behaves on the palate. Instead of a quick melt followed by dryness, you get a longer, smoother finish that feels polished. There is a trade-off though. Too much cocoa butter can make a bar feel thin in flavor because the intensity of cocoa solids becomes more diluted. The most compelling recipes treat cocoa butter like lighting in a room. A little more can reveal details and make everything glow. Too much can wash out the contrast. When you find a bar that feels impossibly smooth yet still tastes deep, you are tasting a careful balance, not an accident. Lecithin helps chocolate flow, so bars can be thinner and smoother. Lecithin is used in tiny amounts, but its impact can be huge. It helps chocolate flow more easily by improving how fat interacts with solid particles. That means a maker can achieve the same porability with less cocoa butter, which can be important for cost and for recipe design. In practical terms, better flow helps chocolate fill molds cleanly, coat candies evenly, and release air bubbles that would otherwise leave pockmarks. It can also improve mouthfeel, because a well-flowing chocolate tends to spread more evenly across the tongue. Lecithin is often derived from soy or sunflower, and the choice can matter for labeling and for subtle flavor preferences. The fascinating part is how invisible it is when used well. You do not taste lecithin as a separate note. You feel its effect as ease, as smoothness, as chocolate that behaves like a liquid when warm and a crisp solid when cooled. It is a small ingredient that acts like a traffic controller, keeping everything moving. Chocolate can seize with a drop of water, turning into a stiff paste. It looks like a disaster, because one moment the chocolate is glossy and fluid, and the next it becomes thick and clumpy. The reason is counterintuitive. Chocolate is a mixture where dry particles are coated in fat. Add a tiny amount of water, and the sugar and cocoa particles start to dissolve just enough to stick together. They clump into a dense mass, and the fat can no longer keep them separated. The texture changes instantly, like wet sand tightening into a ball. This is why steam from a pot, a damp spoon, or a single droplet can ruin a bowl of melted chocolate. It is not about cleanliness. It is about how sensitive the suspension is to moisture. Once seized, the chocolate is not unsafe. It is simply no longer usable for dipping and coating. The trick is knowing what it can become next, rather than throwing it away in frustration. Seized chocolate can be rescued by adding more liquid, then using it differently. The way out of seizing is not to fight the water. It is to commit to it. If you add enough liquid, the clumped particles can disperse again, and the mixture can become smooth, but it will no longer behave like pure melted chocolate. Instead, it becomes a chocolate sauce or a base for a ganache, depending on what you add and how much. Warm water can work. Milk can work. Cream can work. The key is gradual addition with steady stirring, so the mixture loosens rather than tightening again. Once it smooths out, you can use it for drizzling, making hot chocolate, filling cakes, or creating truffles, where a different texture is actually the goal. This is a lovely lesson in kitchen physics. A mistake becomes a fork in the road, and the chocolate takes a new role. The rescue is not pretending the original plan still exists. The rescue is letting the material become what it now wants to be, then using that result with confidence. Couverture chocolate contains more cocoa butter, made for glossy coatings. Couverture is the kind of chocolate that behaves like satin when it is warmed and worked. The extra cocoa butter makes it flow more readily, which matters when you want a thin, even shell around a truffle or a perfectly smooth curtain over a cookie. With a chocolate that is too thick, coatings can pull at the bottom and set with ridges. With this style, the coating can settle into a clean layer that cracks neatly when you bite. It also captures a shine that looks almost wet when it is set well. In professional kitchens, couverture is chosen for performance as much as flavor. It is chocolate designed to move, to cling, and to set with elegance. When you see a bonbon that looks like polished glass, there is a good chance couverture helped make that finish possible. Baking chocolate is often less sweet, designed to be balanced in recipes. Baking chocolate is not meant to be eaten like a candy bar, and that is the whole point. It is built as a strong foundation, so a recipe can decide the final sweetness. In a brownie batter, sugar is already coming from other sources. If the chocolate itself were very sweet, the result could tip into syrupy and flat. Less sweet chocolate also lets cocoa character stay present after baking, when heat can dull delicate aromas. This is why many bakers prefer unsweetened or bittersweet options for serious desserts. You can control sweetness with granulated sugar, brown sugar, or honey, and each brings a different texture and aroma. Baking chocolate is also useful because it melts into mixtures smoothly, then disappears into the structure of a cake or sauce without leaving a separate sugary crass. Identity. It is a tool ingredient, designed to be shaped by the rest of the recipe. Chocolate chips are formulated to hold shape, so they melt more slowly. A chip's job is different from a bar's job. In a cookie, you often want pockets of chocolate that stay distinct after the oven, not a brown puddle that vanishes into the dough. Many chips are designed with that goal in mind. They can include less cocoa butter or a different balance of ingredients, so they soften but resist fully flowing. This is why a handful of chips melted in a bowl can behave oddly compared with chopped chocolate. They may thicken sooner, and they may keep tiny lumps. In baking, that stubbornness becomes a feature. Chips hold their edges long enough to create contrast, so you get a bite of warm cookie and a separate burst of chocolate. If you want a sauce or a glossy ganache, chopped bar chocolate often works better. If you want chocolate landmarks in a cookie, chips shine. Hot chocolate and drinking chocolate are not the same thing. Many people use the names interchangeably, but the experience can be worlds apart. Hot chocolate is often built from cocoa powder mixed with sugar, then blended with milk or water. It can be light, quick, and easy to sip. Drinking chocolate is usually made by melting real chocolate into warm liquid, which brings more cocoa butter and more cocoa solids into the cup. The result can feel thicker and more indulgent, with a deeper aroma that lingers after each swallow. The difference is not only richness, it is texture and structure. Cocoa powder disperses as particles. Melted chocolate creates a fuller body. This is why drinking chocolate can feel almost like dessert served in a mug, while hot chocolate can feel like a warm comfort drink. If you ever wondered why one cup tastes thin and another tastes like velvet, you are tasting two different approaches to the same beloved idea. Traditional drinking chocolate can be thick because it keeps more cocoa solids. In some traditions, a cup of chocolate is closer to pudding than to milk. The thickness comes from keeping more solid cocoa material in the drink and from using methods that help it stay suspended. Some versions are whisked vigorously, creating a foam that changes mouthfeel and carries aroma upward. Others use starches or finely ground chocolate to build body, so the drink coats the tongue and slows the experience. That thickness changes flavor too. When the liquid is dense, bitterness can feel softer, and sweetness can feel more rounded because everything arrives more slowly. A thick cup also stays warm longer, which keeps aroma active. It becomes a small ritual. You sip, you pause, and the flavor keeps unfolding. This style of drinking chocolate is not about hydration. It is about immersion, like stepping into the taste instead of skimming across it. It reminds you that chocolate's history includes the cup, not only the bar. Chocolate ice cream tastes richer when cocoa is bloomed in warm liquid first. Cocoa powder can be stubborn. If you stir it into something cold, it can clump and taste dusty, as if the flavor never fully woke up. Blooming is the simple trick that changes that. You mix cocoa with a warm liquid, often milk, cream, or even hot water, and you give it time to hydrate and dissolve. Heat helps release aroma compounds, and it lets the cocoa particles disperse more evenly. The result is not just smoother ice cream. It is deeper chocolate flavor that feels integrated rather than sprinkled in. Brooming can also make the finished scoop taste less bitter because the cocoa has had a chance to soften and mingle before it is frozen. Many great chocolate desserts start with this small step, and it feels almost like a spell. You are not adding more cocoa. You are helping the cocoa you already have finally show up fully. Pairing chocolate with certain fruits highlights hidden acidity and brightness. Chocolate can seem heavy, but the right fruit can reveal a lighter side that was already there. When you pair dark chocolate with raspberries, cherries, or orange, the fruit's acidity can lift the flavor and make it feel more vivid. It is like turning on a light in a room you thought you knew. The fruit does not only add its own taste, it changes what you notice in the chocolate, pulling forward notes that might otherwise stay buried, like tang, berry-like hints, or a clean, sharp finish. The pairing works best when neither side is too sweet. Overly sweet fruit can make chocolate seem flat. A fruit that is bright and fresh creates contrast, and contrast creates clarity. This is why chocolate-covered citrus peel can taste so alive, and why chocolate and strawberries feel classic. You are not just combining flavors. You are revealing them. Coffee can make chocolate seem deeper because roasted aromas overlap. Coffee and chocolate share a family resemblance, and your nose notices it before your tongue does. Both develop many of their most recognizable aromas through roasting. When you drink coffee alongside chocolate, those roasted notes can reinforce each other, so the chocolate seems darker and more complex. At the same time, coffee's bitterness can make the chocolate sweetness feel more pronounced by comparison. That creates a satisfying push and pull. This is why an espresso can make a small piece of chocolate feel larger, as if the flavor expands in your mouth. The pairing can also shift depending on the coffee. A bright, fruity coffee can pull out sharper notes in chocolate, while a smoky, deep roast can emphasize cocoa richness. In desserts like tiramisu or mocha cake, the combination works because it builds layers without needing extra ingredients. Coffee does not replace chocolate. It amplifies it, like a backing instrument that makes the main melody feel louder. Some cheeses pair with dark chocolate, balancing fat, salt, and bitterness. It sounds strange until you try it slowly. Cheese brings salt and tang, and those can soften the perception of bitterness in a dark bar. The fat in cheese also changes texture because it coats the mouth and can make chocolate feel smoother and less sharp. Certain pairings are especially pleasing. A nutty aged cheese can echo chocolate's roasted tones. A creamy blue cheese can create a dramatic contrast where sweetness, salt, and pungency take turns in the spotlight. The key is portion and pacing. You want a small bite of cheese, then a small piece of chocolate, and a pause to let the flavors meet. This is not about making chocolate taste like cheese. It is about balance, and about discovering that chocolate is more flexible than its dessert reputation suggests. In the right pairing, both foods taste more like themselves, not less. Chocolate tasting uses the same slow sniff, snap, and melt rituals as wine. Tasting well is a way of paying attention, and chocolate rewards attention almost immediately. You start by smelling the surface, because aroma tells you what direction the flavors may travel. Then you listen for the break, which hints at structure and texture. Next comes the slow melt. You let it soften without rushing, and you notice how the flavor changes from the first seconds to the final aftertaste. Some notes appear early, then fade. Others arrive late, like a second chapter. You can even notice how your breathing changes the experience, because exhaling through the nose carries aroma into fuller focus. This ritual is not about being fancy. It is about discovering that chocolate has movement. It evolves while you eat it. When you taste this way, a small square can feel like a long story, with an opening, a middle, and a finish that stays with you. Cacao was introduced to Europe as a luxury drink before it became a bar. When cacao first arrived in Europe, it did not arrive as a snack. It arrived as a drink meant for the wealthy, served in fashionable rooms and treated like an exotic treasure from far away. It was prepared hot, often with sugar and spices, and it demanded equipment, time, and access. That rarity gave it status. It was something you were offered to impress you, not something you grabbed on the street. For a while, chocolate's identity in Europe was closer to coffeehouse culture than to candy. It was sipped, discussed, and displayed. That matters because it shaped expectations. Chocolate became associated with refinement and indulgence long before factories made it cheap. Even the cups and utensils around it carried symbolism. The bar came later, after technology and trade made chocolate easier to store, ship, and sell widely. The first European chocolate was a drink that announced class, not convenience. Early European chocolate was often medicinal, sold as an energizing tonic. In early modern Europe, many foods were also treated as remedies, and chocolate was pulled into that world quickly. It was described as strengthening, warming, and restorative, especially when mixed with sugar, spices, and sometimes other ingredients chosen for supposed pain benefits. People did not need to see laboratory evidence to believe it. They needed a convincing story, a memorable effect, and an authority willing to vouch for it. Chocolate fit the role because it felt rich, sustaining, and special. It could be served to someone recovering or offered to someone expected to work hard. It also traveled through networks where pharmacy and cuisine overlapped, since apothecaries and elite kitchens were both places where expensive imports were handled. This medicinal framing helped chocolate spread socially because it gave indulgence a respectable excuse. You were not necessarily drinking something decadent. You were taking something that sounded helpful. That story softened cultural resistance, and it helped cacao settle into European life. Sugar transformed cacao from bitter status drink into a mass sweet. Cacao on its own can be challenging, and that challenge shaped who embraced it. Sugar changed the social equation. Once sugar became more available, chocolate could shift from an acquired taste into something instantly friendly. Sweetness did more than mask bitterness. It made chocolate feel like comfort, and it widened the audience dramatically. A drink that once signaled elite ritual could now become a treat for children, a snack for workers, and a gift for holidays. It also altered the kinds of flavors people expected. With more sugar in the picture, chocolate could support caramel notes, creamy textures, and dessert pairings that would have seemed odd in a bitter ceremonial cup. Sugar also made chocolate easier to standardize for consistent selling because sweetness is a quick way to create familiarity. This transformation was not only culinary, it was cultural. It turned cacao into a product that could be loved at first taste, which is a powerful engine for popularity. The invention of the cocoa press changed chocolate by separating fat from solids. Before the cocoa press, chocolate was harder to control. The fat and the solids stayed together, and that limited how many textures and products could be created reliably. The press changed that by squeezing cocoa butter out of the chocolate mass. Suddenly, makers could work with two distinct materials. Cocoa butter became its own ingredient for smoothness and melt. The remaining solids could be ground into cocoa powder, which opened new possibilities for baking and drinks. This separation also made it easier to tune recipes. Want a richer bar? Add more cocoa butter. Want a darker tasting cake without extra fat? Use cocoa powder. The press gave chocolate makers a new set of knobs to turn, and those knobs led to innovation. It also helped chocolate travel, because powders and pressed products could be stored and shipped in different ways. One mechanical invention expanded the entire chocolate universe, from the bar to the pantry shelf. Milk chocolate became possible when dried milk could be made reliably. Milk is delicate. Fresh milk spoils quickly, and that used to make it difficult to blend into shelf-stable sweets at scale. The development of reliable dried milk changed that, because it brought milk's proteins and sugars into a form that could travel and wait. Once those milk solids could be mixed into chocolate, a new style was born. It tasted softer, sweeter, and more approachable, and it could be sold widely without the same spoilage worries. Milk chocolate also introduced a new texture expectation. The bar could feel creamier and less intense, which invited a different kind of audience. It also gave makers another dimension to design. They could balance cocoa strength against dairy warmth, creating profiles that ranged from light and caramel-like to rich and cocoa-forward. This change did not only add an ingredient, it added a new emotional identity. Milk chocolate became the taste of comfort for many people, and that comfort was enabled by a technical solution to milk's fragility. The modern chocolate bar depends on industrial grinding fine enough for smoothness. A chocolate bar is not only about what you put in, it is about how small you can make what you put in. Early chocolate could be rough, gritty, and uneven, because reducing particles to a truly silky size is hard work. Industrial grinding changed that. With powerful rollers and refiners, makers could consistently push sugar and cocoa particles below the threshold your tongue easily detects. That smoothness became a standard, and once people got used to it, it was hard to go back. The smooth bar also made chocolate feel more luxurious, even when it was mass-produced, because the mouth reads smoothness as care. Fine grinding also affects how flavor spreads. A smoother chocolate coats the tongue more evenly, which can make aroma seem fuller and sweetness feel more integrated. In other words, industry did not only make chocolate cheaper, it changed what people thought chocolate was supposed to feel like. The modern bar is built on invisible size control. Some chocolate brands built entire towns, shaping labor and social history. Chocolate is often sold as romance, but its industrial past includes factories large enough to shape whole communities. Some companies built housing, schools, and services around their plants, creating company towns where work and daily life were closely linked. For workers, this could mean stability and amenities that were not common elsewhere. It could also mean dependency, because your employer could influence where you lived, where you shopped, and how your family's life was organized. These towns reveal how chocolate moved from craft to industry. They also show how a sweet product can sit at the center of serious social questions, like labor conditions, welfare programs, and control. The factory did not only produce bars, it produced schedules, relationships, and identities. When you see a brand name that feels nostalgic, it can carry this hidden infrastructure behind it. Chocolate's history includes the built environment, not just recipes. A bar can be connected to streets and schools you have never seen. Wartime rations used chocolate for calories, morale, and portability. In wartime, food has to do several jobs at once. It must provide energy, survive transport, and lift spirits in exhausting conditions. Chocolate fit that brief well. It is calorie-dense, relatively compact, and widely liked, which makes it valuable when space and morale both matter. A small portion can carry a lot of fuel, and it can be eaten quickly without preparation. That practicality gave chocolate a serious role that contrasts with its dessert image. It also pushed manufacturers to think about durability. Chocolate can melt, and it can bloom, so making it travel-ready required careful formulation and packaging. For soldiers far from home, chocolate could be a taste of normal life, and that emotional effect is not trivial. A familiar flavor can steady the mind when everything else feels unstable. This is one reason chocolate appears repeatedly in stories of the era. It was not only a treat, it was a tool, and sometimes a comfort object. Chocolate factories once competed fiercely over texture, shelf life, and shine. Once chocolate became industrial, competition moved into details that most eaters never name. A company that could make a bar that stayed glossy longer, snapped more cleanly, and resisted turning dull in storage gained an edge on the shelf. Texture became a selling point, even when it was not advertised openly, because consumers learned to trust mouthfeel. Shelf life mattered for distribution, since chocolate had to travel farther and sit longer without looking tired. Shine mattered because the eye decides first, and a glossy bar reads as fresh and premium. This competition drove process improvements. Manufacturers refined temperature control, mixing methods, and packaging choices. They also standardized quality checks to keep batches consistent. The result is that modern expectations for chocolate are partly shaped by industrial rivalry. Many of the sensory features people now treat as normal were once advantages fought over like secrets. Behind a smooth bite is a history of engineering battles, waged quietly in factories with thermometers and machinery. Advertising helped turn chocolate into a gift symbol, not just a food. Chocolate did not become a universal gift by accident. Advertising and packaging taught people how to think about it. A bar is edible, but a boxed assortment can become a message, and that message can be romance, gratitude, apology, or celebration. Marketers leaned into that emotional flexibility. They used holidays, ribbons, and shared rituals to connect chocolate with occasions, so buying it felt like participating in a tradition. Over time, the product gained a second identity. It was no longer only a thing you consumed. It was a thing you gave to represent how you felt. This shift also influenced design. Boxes became keepsakes. Shapes became symbolic. Limited editions appeared to match seasons. The fascinating part is how quickly the brain learns this language. You can feel a social meaning in a chocolate gift before you taste anything. That meaning is manufactured in the mind, but it is powerful. Advertising did not only sell chocolate. It sold a role for chocolate in human relationships. Cocoa farming supports millions of livelihoods, yet prices can be volatile. A chocolate bar can look calm and certain, but the farming behind it often is not. Many cacao growers rely on small plots, and their income can swing with global prices they do not control. A strong harvest in one region can push prices down elsewhere. A disease outbreak or shipping disruption can change demand and supply overnight. When prices drop, farmers may struggle to pay for pruning, tools, or labor, and that can reduce future yields, which creates a painful loop. When prices rise, the benefit does not always flow evenly, because middle steps in the supply chain take their share. This is why some farmers diversify, growing bananas, cassava, or timber alongside cacao to steady income. Chocolate is delicious, but it is also a livelihood system. Every bite connects to weather, markets, and the daily math of families trying to plan a year ahead. Ethical chocolate sourcing often depends on traceability, not just labels. A label can sound comforting, but a label alone cannot tell you where the beans truly came from. Traceability is the difference between a story and a trackable path. It means knowing which region supplied the cacao, which cooperative or buying station handled it, and sometimes which farm or group of farms produced it. That chain matters because ethical problems hide in anonymity. When cacao from many sources is mixed, it becomes harder to reward good practices or correct harmful ones. Traceable systems can pay premiums for quality and for verified standards, and they can also support training and long-term relationships. Some makers publish sourcing maps, lot codes, or direct trade details so buyers can follow the trail. This is not perfect, and it is not always simple, but it changes incentives. When origins are visible, responsibility becomes harder to dodge. Chocolate becomes less like a mystery blend and more like a product with a known biography. Child labor risks exist in cacao regions, driving monitoring and reform efforts. Cacao is labor-intensive, and in some growing areas there are serious risks that children may be pulled into unsafe or inappropriate work. That reality has pushed governments, companies, and non-profit groups to build monitoring systems, school support programs, and community-based protections. One important point is that the problem is linked to poverty and weak local services, not to one simple villain. When families lack stable income and when schools are distant or under-resourced, pressure rises. That is why solutions often focus on improving household earnings, strengthening education access, and verifying labor conditions through independent checks. Many chocolate companies now face public expectations to show evidence of progress, not only promises. Consumers also play a role by supporting brands that publish clear sourcing information and report on their efforts. This topic is uncomfortable, but it matters, because chocolate should not come at the cost of a child's safety or future. Agroforestry cacao can store carbon, linking chocolate to climate solutions. Cacao does not have to grow in a bare field. In agroforestry systems, cacao is grown alongside other trees, creating layers of vegetation that resemble a managed forest. Those extra trees can store carbon in wood and soil, while also providing shade, leaf litter, and habitat. For farmers, agroforestry can offer additional products, like fruit, nuts, or timber, which can reduce dependence on cacao alone. It can also improve resilience. Diverse plantings can help stabilize soil, reduce erosion, and buffer temperature spikes. This does not automatically make every farm sustainable, and it requires good management to avoid pests and maintain yields. Still, the idea is powerful. A chocolate landscape can be designed to support climate goals rather than fight them. When you picture cacao as part of a forested system, chocolate stops being only a dessert crop. It becomes a land-use choice with global consequences. Climate change threatens cacao yields because cacao dislikes heat extremes. Cacao is a plant that prefers consistency, and climate change is pushing many regions toward instability. Hotter days can stress trees, and shifting rainfall can disrupt flowering and pod development. Longer dry seasons can increase water stress, while heavier downpours can raise disease pressure by keeping conditions damp. Even small changes in local climate can matter because cacao already grows within a narrow comfort zone. Farmers may adapt by planting more shade trees, improving soil moisture retention, or choosing hardier varieties. In some places, production may move to higher elevations where temperatures are cooler, though that shift brings its own land and livelihood challenges. The stakes are high because cacao trees take years to mature. You cannot swap crops overnight without major consequences. Chocolate's future will be shaped not only by taste trends, but by whether cacao landscapes can stay suitable in a warming world, and whether farming communities can afford the adaptations required. Scientists breed cacao for disease resistance while trying to keep flavor. Breeding cacao is like trying to upgrade a house without changing the view. You want trees that resist disease and tolerate stress, but you also want beans that still make wonderful chocolate. That is difficult because traits can be linked. A variety that thrives in the field may produce a flavor profile that is less aromatic, or it may ferment differently. Researchers and breeders work by selecting parent trees, testing seedlings, and evaluating both farm performance and bean quality over time. That timeline is long because cacao trees do not give quick feedback. The goal is not a single super tree, but a toolkit of varieties that can fit different regions and challenges. Some breeding programs partner with farmers and chocolate makers, so flavor is tested in real-world conditions, not only in a lab. When it works, it protects livelihoods and preserves pleasure at the same time. The bar you eat in the future may carry years of patient selection inside it. Some researchers map cacao genomes to protect rare varieties from loss. A cacao tree holds its future inside its DNA, and researchers have been working to read and map that genetic information. Genome mapping helps identify how different cacao populations are related, which trees carry useful traits, and which rare lineages might be at risk of disappearing. This matters because genetic diversity is insurance. A rare variety might contain resistance to a disease that has not spread widely yet, or it might hold flavor potential that could be lost if the trees vanish. Mapping also supports conservation efforts in seed banks and living collections, where genetic material is preserved for breeding and restoration. For chocolate lovers, this science has a quiet payoff. It increases the chance that future chocolate can remain diverse and resilient, rather than collapsing into a narrow set of beans. It is also a reminder that chocolate begins as a wild biological resource, not only as a factory product. Protecting cacao genetics is like protecting a language before it goes silent. New fermentation techniques can fine-tune flavor, like a microbial orchestra. Fermentation used to be treated as something you simply endured, then hoped went well. Increasingly, makers are treating it as a place for careful guidance. Some experiments use selected starter cultures, chosen strains of yeast or bacteria that can steer the process toward particular outcomes. Others focus on controlling temperature, oxygen, and turning schedules with more precision, so batches develop more consistently. The aim is not to sterilize cacao or make it taste artificial. The aim is to reduce unpleasant surprises and to highlight desired notes like fruitiness, nuttiness, or floral tones. This is especially useful for farmers and cooperatives selling to premium markets, where consistent quality can earn better prices. It is also fascinating science, because fermentation is a living system that changes hour by hour. Treat it well, and it can create complexity that feels almost impossible to design deliberately. The better we understand the microbes, the more chocolate becomes a collaboration between biology and craft. Ruby chocolate gets its color from special cacao processing, not added dye. Ruby chocolate looks like it belongs in the fruit aisle, with a pink tone that surprises people who expect chocolate to be brown or cream-colored. The striking part is that the color is not typically created by adding red dye. Instead, it comes from a specific approach to selecting and processing cacao, preserving particular compounds that deliver both color and a bright, tangy flavor. Impression. The result tastes different from dark, milk, or white styles. It can feel lightly fruity and sharp, even without fruit added. This makes it a lesson in how processing can create entirely new categories, not just variations. Ruby chocolate also shows how our eyes shape taste. The pink color sets expectations before the first bite, and those expectations change how we interpret what we smell and feel. Whether you love it or not, it expands the idea of what cacao can become. It is chocolate as a new branch on a familiar tree. Plant-based milk chocolates require fat and protein tricks to mimic dairy. Milk chocolate is not only sweet, it is creamy, and that creaminess comes from dairy proteins, sugars, and fats working together. when makers create plant-based versions, they have to recreate that balance without using cow's milk. Different plant ingredients bring different challenges. Oat can add softness, but it can also bring cereal notes. Almond can add nuttiness, but it can feel thin if fat balance is off. Some recipes use added cocoa butter or other fats to restore smooth melt, and they use emulsifiers to keep everything blended. Protein matters too, because it affects how flavor is perceived and how the chocolate feels as it melts. The goal is not to make a bar that tastes like a salad. The goal is to make a bar that feels familiar, with a clean finish and a creamy texture. When it succeeds, it is a clever piece of food design, built from constraints and careful sensory testing. Cocoa butter is used in cosmetics because it melts and spreads smoothly. That same melt you love in a chocolate bar is useful on skin. It stays solid in the jar, which makes it easy to store and scoop. Then it softens with body warmth and glides into a thin layer that feels protective. This is why you find it in lip balms, lotions, and body butters. It can help slow moisture loss by creating a barrier, which is especially welcome in dry air or after washing. It also has a mild scent that plays well with vanilla, citrus, and floral fragrances, so it rarely fights the perfume choices around it. In older home traditions, people used it as a simple balm for rough hands and wind-chapped lips. Modern formulators like it for texture control because it can make a product feel rich without feeling greasy. Chocolate has a second life in the bathroom, and it begins with the same fat. Chocolate can mask bitter medicine flavors, a trick used for centuries. Bitterness is one of the strongest taste warnings the body has, and it can make medicine hard to swallow. Chocolate helps because it brings sweetness, fat, and powerful aroma. Sweetness can reduce how bitter compounds are perceived. Fat can coat the tongue and slow the direct contact between the bitter molecules and taste receptors. Aroma does another kind of work. When your nose picks up chocolate notes, your brain expects comfort, and that expectation can soften the whole experience. For this reason, pharmacies and households have long used chocolate as a carrier for unpleasant tastes, especially in mixtures that needed to be taken by mouth. Even today, you see chocolate-flavored syrups and chewables. They do not erase the medicine. They distract the senses and change the timing of taste. It is a small lesson in perception. When you change smell and mouthfeel, you can change what the tongue reports. Cocoa flavonols can affect blood flow, though processing can reduce them. Cacao contains flavonols, which are natural compounds that have been studied for effects on blood vessels and circulation. Some research suggests they can support the body's ability to widen blood vessels, which can influence blood flow. The important twist is that the amount you get from a finished product can vary a lot. Many steps that make chocolate taste smoother can also lower flavanol levels, including certain types of processing and heavy roasting. That means two chocolate products that seem similar can be very different in what they deliver. It also means cocoa powders and chocolates marketed for flavanols are often made with extra care to preserve them. This is not a reason to treat candy as medicine, and it is not a promise of the same effect for everyone. It is simply another way cacao shows its complexity. Flavor chemistry and health chemistry can overlap, but they do not always travel together. Darker chocolate is not always higher quality because recipes vary widely. Color can fool us. A very dark bar might look intense and serious, but quality depends on many choices that darkness does not reveal. A maker can push color darker with certain cocoa powders or deeper roasting, and the result can taste flat or harsh. Another maker can produce a slightly lighter bar that tastes vivid and complex because the beans were well handled and the roast was thoughtful. Quality also includes texture. A dark bar can still be gritty if refining was rushed. It can still taste stale if storage was poor. Even sweetness balance matters. A bar can be dark and still taste one note, while a lighter bar can unfold in layers. Darkness can signal cocoa content. It can also be a style choice. The safest approach is to judge by aroma, melt, and finish, rather than by shade alone. Chocolate is not a paint chip. It is a crafted food with many ways to succeed or fail. Percentage on a bar describes cocoa content, not sweetness alone. A percentage sounds like a sweetness meter, but it is really a composition clue. It tells you how much of the bar comes from cacao ingredients, which usually means cocoa solids plus cocoa butter. The remaining portion is mostly sugar, and sometimes milk solids in milk chocolate styles. This is why two bars with the same percentage can taste very different. One might use more cocoa butter and feel smoother. Another might use less cocoa butter and feel drier. The cacao itself also matters. A high percentage bar made from harsh beans can taste aggressive. A slightly lower percentage bar made from aromatic beans can taste more nuanced and satisfying. The percentage also does not tell you much about added flavorings, salt, or the skill of fermentation and roasting upstream. Think of it as a map legend, not the whole landscape. It helps you predict intensity, but it cannot promise pleasure. The real story begins when you smell it and let it melt. Some bars list cacao origin like a passport, naming farms and harvests. Chocolate can be anonymous, or it can be traceable like fine coffee. Some makers print details that read like travel documents. They might name a region, a cooperative, a farm, or even a harvest period. This is not only romance. It is accountability and craft. When a maker commits to a specific source, they can build relationships, pay for quality, and learn how that cacao behaves each season. For you, as a listener and taster, it turns the bar into a place you can imagine in real terms. It also invites comparison. You might notice that one origin tends toward bright fruit notes, while another leans toward deep roasted warmth. These labels can also protect farmers who do excellent work because their name is attached to the result. It is a shift from commodity to identity. A passport-style label says, "This bar came from somewhere specific, and someone is willing to be known for it." Chocolate's flavor can linger because fats hold aromas longer in the mouth. A long finish is not only a poetic idea, it is physics. Fats can dissolve aroma compounds and release them gradually as you breathe and swallow. Cocoa butter coats the mouth in a thin film, and that film acts like a slow diffuser. Even after the chocolate is gone, traces of aroma can keep rising into the back of the nose. That is why some bars seem to echo for minutes, with late notes that appear after you thought the story was over. This lingering can also change how you remember a bar. A short finish can feel simple, even if the first bite was exciting. A long finish can feel luxurious because it keeps you engaged without more chewing. It is also why water and tea pair so well with chocolate. They can clear the palate, then let you notice what remains. The melt is the beginning, but the lingering is where many chocolates reveal their best secrets. The chocolate note in perfumes often comes from the same aroma molecules. Perfumers do not need melted chocolate to create a chocolate impression. They can build it from aroma molecules that overlap with roasted cacao, caramelized sugars, and warm woods. Some of these molecules also show up naturally during cacao roasting, which is why the bridge feels believable. In perfume, the chocolate note is usually more about suggestion than dessert. It can add warmth, depth, and comfort, and it can make other notes feel smoother. Paired with vanilla, it becomes creamy. Paired with citrus, it becomes playful. Paired with smoky woods, it becomes dark and sophisticated. This is a good reminder that chocolate is as much smell as taste. If you close your eyes and sniff a high-quality bar, you are already in the territory perfumers work in. The difference is that perfume stays on skin, while chocolate disappears into the body. Both are built on invisible airborne chemistry that the brain reads as feeling. A perfect truffle is an emulsion balancing fat, water, and cocoa solids. A truffle seems simple, but it is a careful balance. At its heart is a mixture of chocolate and cream, and those ingredients do not naturally want to stay smooth together. Chocolate brings fat and solids. Cream brings water, fat, and proteins. When the emulsion is right, the filling feels silky and stable, and it melts into a slow, rich wave. When it breaks, it can look oily or grainy, and the mouthfeel turns muddy. Temperature matters from the first moment. If the cream is too hot, it can scorch flavors or separate fats. If it is too cool, it may not melt the chocolate evenly. Stirring technique matters too. You want to build a glossy center from the inside outward, not whip in air. Then, resting matters, because the structure continues to set as it cools. A great truffle is not just a sweet. It is a controlled meeting of liquids that should not easily agree. Every chocolate bar is a small record of biology, weather, and human craft. A bar can feel like a finished object, but it is more like a timeline you can taste. Biology writes the first chapter in the trees, genetics, and the pod's chemistry. Weather edits the story through rain, heat, and harvest timing. Then people take over with choices that add or remove possibilities. How carefully was the fruit opened? How cleanly did the fermentation move? How evenly did the beans dry? How patiently were they roasted, refined, and rested? Each step leaves fingerprints, and some fingerprints are loud. A bar can taste bright, deep, or delicate because of decisions made weeks or months earlier by someone you will never meet. That is what makes chocolate worth attention. It is not only a flavor. It is an outcome. It carries a chain of living processes that had to align, from tiny flowers to careful packaging. When you snap a piece, you are hearing the end of a long story. Hello there, and as we come to the end of our journey, let the world of chocolate slowly settle into the background. Tonight we wandered from humid tropical groves to warm fermentation heaps, and from careful roasting rooms to glossy finished bars. We traced how a fruit becomes a flavor, how microbes and heat reshape seeds into something fragrant, and how tiny choices decide snap, shine, and melt. We listened for the quiet science behind sweetness, behind aroma, behind that familiar comfort that seems to arrive before the first bite. And we noticed how chocolate is never just one thing. It is agriculture and chemistry. It is history and craft. It is a chain of human hands and living systems folded into something small enough to rest on your tongue. If you enjoyed drifting through this story, you might like to leave a kind thought or tap like and subscribe so these sleepy science journeys can reach more ears. And if you happen to still be awake, there is another video waiting on your screen now. You can let it carry you onward, one curious step at a time. But for now, you do not need to hold any details. Let the ideas dissolve, the way chocolate softens with warmth. Allow your jaw to unclench. Let your shoulders soften. Feel your breathing slow into a steady rhythm, in and out, unhurried and easy. Sleep well, and good night.